My name is Elaine Walker. I'm 52 years old, and for the last 2 decades I've built something that was supposed to outlast me, something I thought I'd be proud to hand over with grace and peace of mind. Walker MedTech started in a dusty garage behind a strip mall on the outskirts of Phoenix. Back then, it was just me, a stack of unpaid bills, and Howard Mitchell, my best friend co-founder, and at times the only person who truly believed this company had a future. Today, it's valued at just under $100 million, and our surgical equipment is used in over 300 hospitals nationwide. But none of that mattered last Saturday night, because that was the night I realized I hadn't just married a charming man with ambition. I had married a thief in a tailored suit. It happened at my son's 30th birthday party, a celebration I had spent months planning. We rented the rooftop of the Biltmore downtown, complete with jazz trio aged Scotch, and a guest list full of friends, family, and industry partners. It wasn't just a birthday. It was a moment, a transition, my moment to step back to toast, to legacy, and to pass the torch to Daniel, my son, my pride, my chosen successor. I'd prepared a small speech, nothing fancy. Just a few words about resilience, about the value of integrity in business, about building something from nothing, and most of all, about Daniel, who had earned every ounce of my respect by never asking for this yet, rising to meet the responsibility anyway. When I announced that effective immediately, Daniel would take on the title of Chief Executive Officer of Walker MedTech, the applause felt warm. Earned right. Everyone smiled, except my husband. Mark stood motionless at the edge of the room, swirling his bourbon jaw clenched just enough that I recognized the tension he usually saved for business meetings gone sour. He didn't say anything that night. Not in front of the guests. Not when Daniel thanked him kindly for attending. Not even when I reached for his hand during the last toast. But as soon as we got home, he exploded. "You had no right," he said, throwing his blazer across the room. "We're married, Elaine. You don't make multi-million-dollar decisions without consulting your husband." I blinked, stunned. "Mark, this is a company I founded before I even met you. Daniel has been preparing for this for years. You knew this was coming." His voice dropped into something colder, sharper. "I knew you talked about it. I didn't think you'd actually go through with it. And not without legal review. Not without considering the financial implications. You've just given away the most valuable asset in our marital estate." That word, marital estate, hit me like a slap. I felt something shift in the room, something heavy and final. This wasn't about legacy to him. It wasn't about Daniel or the company or the thousands of patients we serve. It was about ownership, control, money. I stood there, still in my heels and silk blouse from the party, staring at the man I'd married just 14 months earlier. The man who had brought me flowers every Monday for the first 10 weeks of our relationship, who said he admired strong women, who claimed to respect the work I'd done. Now he was standing in my living room telling me that I owed him a seat at the table, and that's when the rest of it began to unravel. Within 48 hours, Daniel's company keycard was deactivated. Within a week, my assistant told me Mark had requested access to our vendor contracts, claiming he was reviewing liability terms as an internal consultant. By day 10, I received an email forwarded from one of our board members suggesting Mark had begun lobbying to have me removed as acting board chair on the grounds of personal bias and declining judgment. It would have been laughable if it weren't so coordinated, and if I didn't know just how charming Mark could be when he wanted something. What he didn't know, what no one knew, was that Howard and I had prepared for this day years ago. Not because we thought Mark would come for it, but because we always knew that money brings sharks. That's why every major decision at Walker MedTech, especially during executive transition, requires 2 signatures, mine and Howard's. Mark Reynolds didn't come into my life as a whirlwind. He came in like a well-tailored breeze, cool, comforting, and calculated. We met at a medical technology conference in San Diego. I was a keynote speaker presenting on innovation in minimally invasive surgical tools. He approached me after my session with a quiet admiration that felt refreshing after years of condescension from younger men in the field. "I've followed your work since the early aughterns," he said, shaking my hand. "What you've built is nothing short of remarkable. I should have been wary. But after years of pushing building and raising a child alone, I wanted to believe someone saw me, not just my achievements, but me. Mark was smart, successful, and attentive. He had worked in healthcare sales for over a decade, and he understood the grind. Or so I thought. Dinners turned into weekends, weekends into trips. Before I knew it, we were sharing Sunday coffee in the kitchen and talking about the future. Howard, of course, had reservations from the beginning. Something's off, he told me after meeting Mark for the first time at one of our board dinners. He listens like a man gathering leverage, not interest. I brushed it off. Howard had always been too protective at times. Not every man is out to take advantage of me, I had said. No, Howard replied, but the ones who are, they usually look just like him. Still, I moved forward. I told myself I deserved happiness, companionship. A second chapter. When Mark proposed 8 months later at a vineyard in Napa, I said yes. We signed a prenup at my insistence, something Howard had pushed for hard, but at the time I didn't realize how carefully Mark had danced around the details. He never asked for a percentage of the company outright, just talked about being a team and building something together. What he did ask for, though, was access, slowly, subtly. He started attending company events, introducing himself as executive partner at Walker MedTech. He offered unsolicited advice to my COO. At first, I laughed it off. He just wants to be involved, I told Howard. But Howard wasn't laughing. He's positioning himself Elaine. I've seen this play before. Hell, I've been in the audience. And then came the files. 2 weeks after Mark's birthday outburst, Howard showed up at my office with a locked briefcase. He shut the door, pulled the blinds, and sat across from me like we were back in the early days plotting in secrecy. I hired a private firm the day you told me he proposed, he said. I hoped I'd be wrong. The dossier he handed me was thick and damning. Mark Reynolds wasn't Mark Reynolds. His legal name was Marcus Ryan Cooper, and he'd changed it twice in the past 15 years. 3 marriages. 3 quiet divorces. Each wife had been successful. Each had lost a substantial portion of her wealth or business shortly after the marriage ended. In the first case, it was a shared real estate firm in Colorado bankrupt within 8 months of their split. The second was a boutique chain of luxury clinics in Florida. After their divorce, she sued him for siphoning funds and falsifying invoices. The case was settled privately. The third, the most recent before me, was a widow in Chicago who ran a wellness company. She died of an overdose a year after their split. There were whispers of coercion, but nothing proven. I couldn't breathe. The man who rubbed my feet after long workdays, who claimed to adore my cooking, who gave me my favorite necklace on our anniversary, had done this before. More than once. Howard leaned forward. We're dealing with a pro, a long-game player. He marries power leverages, proximity, then extracts value until he's no longer needed. And he's patient. I sat silently, hands clenched in my lap. You didn't do anything wrong, Howard added gently. But now you have to do everything right. We reviewed the prenup. Thankfully, I had insisted on clear divisions of assets. Mark had no legal claim to Walker MedTech's equity. But Howard had anticipated a scenario like this when we updated the corporate bylaws 5 years ago. No major executive decisions, structural reorganizations, or financial disbursements over $25,000 could be approved without dual signatures, mine and his. He was still the board-appointed co-signer for strategic matters, something I had almost removed last year, thinking it was unnecessary now that I had a husband. I never stopped trusting you, I whispered to him that night. I didn't need you, too, Howard said. I just needed to make sure no one else got the chance to undo what you built. Mark didn't know any of this yet, but he would. The next morning, Daniel called me in a panic. His access was still disabled. He had received a memo suggesting he no longer had a role at the company. That was it. It was time to move. That afternoon, I gathered my inner circle, Howard, Daniel, our CFO, Jessica, and Martin Ross, our longtime corporate attorney. We're not dealing with an angry husband, I said calmly, placing the dossier on the table. We're dealing with a predator. Martin flipped through the pages and looked up. You ready to make this official? I nodded. Then let's start with what he wants most. Howard said, a slow smile forming on his face. And make sure it's the one thing he'll never get. By Monday morning, the sky over Phoenix was a dull gray, the kind of sky that makes everything feel heavier, like the clouds themselves are watching and waiting for something to break. I arrived at Walker MedTech headquarters before sunrise. No assistants, no driver. Just me, coffee in hand, and a sense of resolve I hadn't felt in years. Mark had made his move. Now it was my turn. I walked through the front doors like I always had, scanning my badge at the glass turnstile. Access denied. The red light blinked twice. I tried again, slower this time. Access denied. The security guard, young, polite, and clearly unfamiliar with company history, stepped forward. "I'm sorry, ma'am, are you a visitor?" "No," I replied coolly. "I'm the co-founder and board chair of this company." He hesitated. I was just told your clearance was revoked over the weekend." Of course it was. Mark had moved faster than I thought. Fortunately, I'd already arranged for backup. Jessica Torres, our CFO of 12 years, appeared moments later, walking briskly across the lobby with her ID badge in hand. "She's not just the co-founder," Jessica told the guard. "She's still a signing authority, and I'll personally vouch for her." "Now." The guard stepped aside, flustered. Inside the elevator, Jessica glanced at me. "He sent out a company-wide email yesterday. Said you were taking medical leave due to exhaustion, and that he'd be assuming interim operations leadership until further notice." I actually laughed. Medical leave. "He's reaching for sympathy now. He's setting up a narrative," she replied. "A tired, overwhelmed wife, a devoted husband stepping in to help during a difficult transition. And how's the staff reacting?" Jessica shrugged. "Mixed. The senior team knows it's crap, but the newer hires some of the middle management they don't know enough of the history, and Mark's good at playing the hero." The elevator dinged and we stepped into the executive suite only to find the entrance to my office locked. Taped to the door was a note typed in bold font. "Per internal restructuring protocol, all access to this office is temporarily restricted pending board review. Interim management." Jessica ripped it off and crumpled it without comment. I walked to the conference room instead. 10 minutes later, Daniel Howard Martin Ross and 2 of our department heads joined us. We shut the blinds. No assistants, no observers. "Status report," I said. Daniel spoke first. "My team has been reassigned, some to completely irrelevant departments. One guy from my lab is now in logistics. None of them were notified directly, they found out through schedule changes." Jessica added, "Mark's been emailing vendors and clients from a new email mark, starwalkermedtech.com. He's signing as acting CEO." Martin leaned forward, opening a thick legal folder. "That ends today, but we need to act fast." I nodded. "Let's move." The board meeting. At precisely 10:00 a.m., we entered the main boardroom on the 27th floor. Mark was already there, seated comfortably in what had once been Howard's chair, the symbolic head of the table. My seat. He wore a light gray suit, no tie hair slicked back, and that ever-so-polite mask he always put on for corporate events. "Elaine," he said, standing up just enough to seem respectful. "I didn't expect you this morning." "Clearly," I said, walking to the opposite end of the table and taking my rightful place beside Howard. "You've been making a lot of decisions in my absence." "Tough times call for leadership," he replied smoothly, gesturing toward the board members seated around him. "And the company needed a steady hand while you took some personal time." I almost admired the audacity. Howard cleared his throat. "Before we go further, I'd like to officially open this emergency session of the board. Present all members, legal counsel, CFO, and departmental heads per charter guidelines." Mark's jaw twitched. Mr. Reynolds Martin said, flipping open a folder, "You've represented yourself as acting CEO. On what basis?" Mark smiled, feigning humility. "My wife and I are equal partners in life. When her recent health concerns arose, we made a joint decision that I'd step in to maintain operations. Informal, yes, but necessary." He paused, letting the implication hang. However, Martin continued under Walker MedTech bylaws, Section 8A, no executive change in leadership can occur without a board vote, a full psychological assessment if health is claimed as a factor, and the approval of both co-signers. Howard interrupted, holding up a signed document, neither of which happened. I stood. "Let's be clear," I said. This man has impersonated a company officer, accessed proprietary documents without authorization, and interfered with staffing without board review. And I have proof. I pulled out the second file, the one Howard had given me, and handed copies to each board member. Inside a summary of Mark's alias's marriage history, financial trails, and screenshots of emails he'd sent to a competitor 2 weeks prior. I'll let you draw your own conclusions, I said, but I'm not waiting for him to finish what he started. One board member, an older man named Glenn, who'd been with us since 2009, leaned back, frowning. "This is serious," Jessica added. "He's already tried to open offshore accounts using Daniel's name. We have flagged activity through internal audits." The room exploded with questions. Mark tried to speak, but the board wasn't listening anymore. He stood up, visibly shaking. "This is character assassination." Martin raised a hand calmly. "It's corporate protection." The vote, Howard stood. I moved to revoke any and all assumed authority from Mr. Mark Reynolds regarding Walker MedTech operations and to ban him from future participation in company affairs pending legal action. I second, said Glenn. "All in favor?" Howard asked. Every hand went up except Mark's, of course. "Motion passed unanimously," Howard declared. Mark turned to me, red-faced. "You're going to regret this." "No," I said quietly. "I regret not seeing through you sooner." Security entered the room without being called. Martin had already arranged it. As they escorted Mark out, he snarled, "This isn't over, Elaine. You think I don't have leverage. You think your little safety nets are enough." I stood, voice calm. "You were never a threat, Mark. Just a temporary distraction. One I've now removed." Aftermath. The room remained quiet long after he left. Finally, Jessica broke the silence. "We need to notify the staff." "I'll do it," I said. Later that afternoon, I called a full team meeting, something we rarely did unless there was a crisis. I stood before over 300 employees in our auditorium, my heart pounding, but my voice steady. I know there's been confusion these last few weeks, misinformation, sudden changes. But let me be clear, Walker MedTech is not in crisis. We are not divided. We are reclaiming our values. The applause began slowly, then built. "We are a company founded on trust, innovation, and integrity," I continued. "No single person defines us. No outsider can derail us. We stand today stronger because we confronted deception and chose clarity over chaos." That night, as I sat in my quiet office for the first time in weeks, Howard walked in with 2 glasses of bourbon. "To lessons learned," he said. I clinked his glass. "And to never mistaking charm for character again." It would have been nice if that boardroom victory marked the end of it. But men like Mark Reynolds, or rather Marcus Ryan Cooper, don't disappear quietly. They regroup. They look for allies. And more dangerously, they exploit systems already rigged to favor their kind. 3 days after he was escorted out of our building, Jessica stormed into my office holding a copy of the Phoenix Business Journal. The headline stopped me cold. "Walker MedTech faces takeover bid from Biocore Dynamics former exec tapped as advisor." Page 6. Jessica snapped, tossing the paper on my desk. I flipped to the article, my stomach turning as I read. In a surprise announcement, Biocore Dynamics has issued a preliminary acquisition offer to the board of Walker MedTech, offering a 22% premium on current market value. The move is being positioned as a strategic consolidation in the competitive surgical technology space. A senior advisory role is expected to be filled by Marcus R. Cooper, formerly associated with Walker MedTech. I stared at the words for a long moment, pulse pounding. He wasn't just retaliating. He was trying to buy the company out from under me. "That bastard," I whispered. Jessica nodded grimly. "He's feeding them intel, probably exaggerating our instability." I already got 3 calls this morning from clients asking if we're getting sold. The timing couldn't be worse. We were 2 weeks from launching a new generation of robotic surgical arms, a project that had taken 4 years of research and over $9 million in development. If Biocore got their hands on it, they'd either shelve it or rebrand it as their own. I picked up the phone and called Daniel. "Emergency meeting. 1 hour. Bring Howard and Martin." The emergency strategy room. By noon, we were all gathered again in the same conference room where we had ousted Mark, only this time the mood was even tenser. Daniel laid it out plainly. If BioCore convinces enough of our public shareholders to sell, they could own 20% of the company by next quarter. Add in any weak board votes and we've got a hostile takeover on our hands. I turned to Martin. Legal options limited, he admitted. They haven't violated any laws yet, but we can counter with a poison pill. Jessica grimaced. That'll spook investors. A poison pill, Martin explained for Daniel's benefit, is a strategy where we allow existing shareholders to buy more stock at a discount, effectively diluting the value for a hostile party. It works, but it's aggressive. And messy. Howard shook his head. We need to hit them somewhere else. Not with reaction, but with revelation. I looked at him. You mean go public? He nodded. Controlled press release. Not just about the takeover, but about Mark. About what he's doing, who he is, and what's really at stake. Jessica raised an eyebrow. Wouldn't that make us look unstable? No, I said. It'll make us look human and transparent. Now the press play. The next morning, I sat down in front of a camera with a prepared statement. No teleprompter, no PR polish. Just me. We uploaded the video to our investor relations portal, sent it to major clients, and pushed a press release across every relevant business wire. I looked into the lens and began, My name is Elaine Walker. I've spent 25 years building Walker MedTech from the ground up. We are a company driven by innovation and guided by integrity. And this week, we are being tested not by market trends or medical setbacks, but by betrayal. A former spouse now operating under a false identity is attempting to sell private information and mislead competitors into launching a hostile takeover of our company. Let me be clear, we are not for sale. We are not broken, and we are not backing down. Within hours, it exploded online. Industry analysts called it bold, unprecedented, and a calculated middle finger to predatory M&A tactics. Some investors were spooked, sure, but most, they were energized. The Walker brand had always been personal. Now, it was battle-tested. Our The Bait and Switch mark unsurprisingly fired back. 2 days later, BioCore announced a clarification distancing themselves from Mr. Cooper's personal history and claiming they had no prior knowledge of his past. But the damage was done. We'd sent a message not just to BioCore, but to anyone watching you want this company, you better come through the front door with clean hands. Then Martin pulled our trump card. In a closed-door meeting with BioCore's legal team, he presented a series of confidential email logs and financial transfer records from Mark's time with us, proving that he had attempted to sell components of our robotics project before his removal from the company. Corporate espionage. Clean and prosecutable. Martin didn't even have to threaten legal action. BioCore folded within 48 hours. They pulled the offer, publicly apologized, and announced a new ethics review policy that, while performative, was a quiet admission of failure. As for Mark last, we heard he had fled the state. Rumors placed him in Vancouver, then Hong Kong. Then back in Chicago, trying to cozy up to another tech widow. I told my attorney to file no further action. We'd already won where it mattered. After the storm. In the days that followed, I took time finally to breathe. We held our product launch. It was a success. Daniel gave the keynote presentation to a packed ballroom of surgeons, venture partners, and medical tech journalists. I watched from the wings, heart full. He had grown into the role with quiet confidence and zero entitlement, the opposite of Mark. After the event, as we shared a toast in a quiet corner of the hotel bar, Daniel looked at me and said, You know you didn't have to fight all this alone, right? I smiled. Maybe, but I needed to. He nodded. Next time, let us help sooner. I put a hand on his shoulder. Deal. A week after the BioCore bid, collapsed life around the office began to return to something resembling normal. The calls from journalists slowed, investor nerves calmed, and for the first time in months, I could sit in my office, sip my coffee, and not brace myself for the next ambush. But inside, I was anything but calm, because when the war is over, the silence can be louder than the bombs. Everyone kept telling me I'd won. But it didn't feel like a win. I didn't feel victorious. I felt hollow. Everywhere I turned, boardrooms, presentations, my own kitchen, I could still feel the ghost of him. The wine we drank, the jokes we shared, the trust I offered so freely now twisted and brittle. Mark hadn't just tried to steal my company. He'd made me doubt my own judgment, my ability to see people, my ability to love again. Howard noticed it before anyone else. He showed up one evening with a casserole dish, his version of a peace offering. "You've barely smiled in 2 weeks," he said gently, setting the food on my counter. "I'm just tired," I lied. "No, you're grieving." I didn't answer. We ate in silence, the kind between two people who've weathered too much together to need words. Eventually, he stood and kissed the top of my head. "You're not the fool here," he said before walking out, "but even the sharpest minds bleed when the cut's from the inside." The letter. 3 days later, I received a package. No return address, no postmark I recognized. Inside was a handwritten note on cream-colored stationery, Elaine. "You don't know me, but I know what you're going through. I once wore the same ring you did. I once believed the same lies." He changed his name when he left me. "I tracked him down after seeing your company in the news. Please, I don't want anything from you, just to talk. Natalie Shaw, Lake Forest, Illinois." For a moment, I froze. Natalie. The second wife. I remembered her name from the dossier Howard gave me. She was the one with the wellness clinics in Florida, the one who had sued him and settled quietly. At first, I tossed the letter into the desk drawer. What good could come from reopening wounds? But that night, after pacing my kitchen floor for over an hour, I picked up the phone and dialed the number written at the bottom of the note. The Natalie's story. We agreed to meet halfway in Denver, neutral ground. She was in her early 50s, composed and striking in the quiet way women who've survived too much tend to be. Her smile was careful. Her handshake was firm. Over lunch, we shared details, timelines, tactics, words he'd used with both of us. "I used to blame myself," she admitted, stirring her tea. "I was so in love with the idea of him, the man who understood my vision. He told me we'd be a power couple, that he'd protect me from the vultures." I nodded. He used that exact phrase on me, too. She sighed. "I didn't realize until it was too late that he was the vulture." I asked about her settlement. She looked away. "It wasn't worth it," she said. "By then, the brand was damaged, my staff was demoralized, and I just wanted out." We sat in silence for a while. Then she looked at me, her eyes soft. "But you fought back," she said. "You exposed him. You stopped him. That's more than I ever did." I didn't feel heroic. I felt exhausted. Natalie reached into her bag and pulled out a small velvet pouch. She placed it on the table between us. "I want to give you this," she said. "I know it's strange, but I think you'll understand." Inside was a gold bracelet, elegant classic, with tiny letters engraved on the inside. "Love builds, lies destroy." "He gave this to me a month before he emptied my personal accounts," she said softly. "I had it re-engraved after the divorce. It reminded me to trust slowly, and never again with closed eyes." My throat tightened. I didn't know what to say. She touched my hand. "You're not alone, Elaine, and you're not broken." The flight home felt different. I'd gone expecting more pain, but Natalie gave me something else: perspective. For weeks, I'd been mourning the death of a love that never existed. And now, I was starting to mourn something more important, the part of myself I'd forgotten in his shadow. That weekend, I canceled all my meetings and drove out to Sedona alone. I stayed at a quiet lodge nestled among red rocks, turned off my phone, and brought only a notebook and a pen. I wrote for hours about the early days with Daniel, about the fear of building something from scratch, about the thrill of pitching investors in back rooms and hospitals, about the nights I used to sleep in the office because I couldn't afford a second employee, about the pride of watching my son step into a boardroom and hold his own, about the betrayal, the scars, the warning signs I ignored, and then, eventually, about the woman I wanted to be next, not a victim, not even a survivor, but a founder, a leader, a mother, a woman who had been tested and chose not to fold. Back to the office. On Monday, I walked into Walker MedTech not as someone recovering, but as someone rebuilding. I hosted a town hall with our full team. I didn't mention Mark by name. I didn't have to. I've made mistakes, I told them, but I've also made a company that fights to stand for what's right, even when it costs us. That will never change. Then I introduced our new Chief Operations Officer, a woman named Priya Malik, former VP at a Fortune 100 medical device firm, brilliant, decisive, and above all, ethical. We weren't just surviving. We were evolving. The bracelet, I still wear the bracelet Natalie gave me. Not out of pain, not as a reminder of Mark, but because of the words inside. Love builds, lies destroy. And now every time I feel doubt creep in when I sit across a negotiation table or feel the press of old fear, I run my thumb across those words. And I remember what nearly broke me also revealed me. Not weaker, but wiser. 6 months passed. 6 months of rebuilding, restructuring, and recommitting to everything I had once nearly lost. Walker MedTech not only recovered it, thrived. Sales exceeded projections. Employee satisfaction rose. Clients who had quietly paused contracts during the Mark scandal came back. Some even brought new business with them, but success has a funny way of demanding more. And for the first time in 25 years, we were ready to answer that demand with an initial public offering. It wasn't an easy decision. Howard and I had debated it for years. Going public meant scrutiny. It meant accountability to shareholders who might not understand our values. But it also meant access to capital we needed to take our next big step, a fully integrated AI-assisted surgical suite. Revolutionary, costly, and incredibly risky. The executive team voted unanimously in favor. The IPO roadmap was set in motion. The first pitch. We flew to New York in early spring to meet with a group of potential institutional investors. I hadn't been in one of those midtown boardrooms since I was 34 and begging for seed capital with a product prototype in a cardboard box. Now, I walked in with a professionally bound portfolio, a slate of patents, and a 5-year vision backed by 3 decades of results. But Wall Street doesn't care about your journey. They care about what you can deliver next quarter. Halfway through our pitch, one of the investors leaned back in his leather chair, fingers tinted, and asked, "What's your exit strategy?" I blinked. "I don't have one." He smiled like I was quaint. "Everyone has an exit, even if it's just aging out." "I'm not here to exit," I said evenly. "I'm here to expand." The room was quiet for a beat. Then Priya, our new COO, picked up seamlessly and finished the pitch. Afterward, she gave me a look I knew well-composed concern. "You sure you're ready for this world again?" she asked on the plane ride home. I nodded. "I'm more than ready, but they're not ready for me." In the message. 2 weeks later, I received a message through a mutual contact. A representative from a well-known private equity firm wanted to schedule a one-on-one discussion before the IPO. They had a senior partner who, quote, had a personal understanding of Walker MedTech's origins. The name on the signature stopped me cold. Thomas H. Walker, my ex-husband, Daniel's father. It had been over 20 years since we'd spoken beyond a handful of holiday phone calls and brief court exchanges when Daniel was still a teen. The last I heard, Thomas had sold off his third startup, remarried, and moved to Connecticut. Now he was back in business and in my orbit. I didn't want the meeting, but I took it. Because sometimes the past doesn't stay buried, and sometimes you need to know why it's digging itself up again. The meeting, we met in Boston in a private conference room overlooking the harbor. He stood when I entered, older now, grayer, leaner, but still with that slick self-confidence that used to charm and then infuriate me. "Elaine," he said softly. "Thomas." He gestured to the chair. I didn't sit. "You've been busy," I said. "So have you," he replied. "Impressive work. I've followed your company for years." I narrowed my eyes. "Spare me the compliments. What do you want?" He hesitated, then gave a sheepish smile. "I want in." I crossed my arms. "Not like that," he added quickly. "Not romantically. I know that ship's not just sailed, it's been scuttled and burned. But I believe in what you're building. My firm wants a seat at the table. Early." I laughed. "You want preferred shares?" He nodded. "You walked out on a pregnant woman with $4,000 in the bank and a dream on paper," I said. And now you want in on what she built? His smile faded. I know I was selfish back then. You were a coward, I corrected, and the only reason Daniel knows you at all is because I made sure he did. He looked down. You're right. I didn't come here to defend who I was. I came here to say, I believe in you now. I believe in this company, and I want to support it. No games, no takeover. Just capital and experience. I stared at him for a long moment, and to my surprise, I didn't feel rage. I felt nothing, because somewhere along the way, I'd stopped needing his apology. Daniel's the CEO now, I said, if you want and talk to him. But I'm not recommending it. He looked surprised. You trust him with that, completely. The public offering. 3 months later, Walker MedTech went public. We rang the bell at the NASDAQ, surrounded by engineers, doctors, investors, and family. Howard was there beaming. Jessica cried. Priya gave a toast so eloquent I half wished she'd written my wedding vows instead of my press statements. As for Daniel, he stood beside me proud and steady, a man carved from resilience. Our IPO was oversubscribed by 180%. By end of day, our valuation had doubled. That night, back at our Phoenix headquarters, we hosted a quiet dinner for our original team, the ones who stayed during the chaos. I raised a glass. To all of you, I said, you built something that will outlive us, not because of greed, but because of grit, not because we were perfect, but because we never gave up. Then I looked at Daniel. And to you, I added, who taught me that passing the torch doesn't mean fading into the dark. It means lighting something even brighter. Epilogue. A letter unsent. A few weeks later, I found myself staring at a blank piece of stationery. I'd meant to write to Natalie Shaw to tell her about the IPO, about how it all ended, about how I was finally sleeping through the night again. Instead, I just wrote one line. Thank you for helping me remember who I was before he made me forget. Then I folded it, placed it in the bracelet pouch she had given me, and tucked it away in a drawer. Some things didn't need to be sent to be felt. Some battles don't end with confetti, but with quiet, steady triumph. And sometimes that's the kind of victory that matters most. Success changes the way people treat you. In the weeks following our IPO, the calls came in, waves, venture groups, international distributors, even tech conglomerates with sweet-talking liaisons offering strategic partnerships that read more like veiled power grabs. Everyone wanted a piece of the company now that it had proven its worth on the public stage. But amid all the expected noise, one message stood out. It came as a simple letter, no branding, no glossy paper. Just a folded envelope handwritten and postmarked from Geneva, Switzerland. Médecins Sans Limites Medical Frontiers. Initiative ATTN, Elaine Walker. I read it twice before I said a word. They weren't asking for money. They were asking for collaboration. The proposal. 3 days later, I sat in a conference call with Dr. Amina Latif, founder of the Medical Frontiers Initiative, a coalition of NGOs, refugee health clinics, and crisis response units spanning 14 countries. She didn't waste time. We've been following your company's developments with robotic-assisted surgery, she said. We believe the core tech could be scaled for field hospitals and post-disaster operations. I frowned. Field hospitals? Our systems are complex. They rely on stable electricity full surgical suites. And that's exactly why we want to partner, she cut in. We want your help to create a portable modular version, smaller, faster, designed not for luxury hospitals but for war zones, earthquake sites, refugee camps. My mind spun. Dr. Latif continued, we're not asking for free units. We want R&D input, joint design, your engineers, our field expertise, and maybe in a year's time a pilot program in South Sudan. There was no hidden profit here, no equity deal. No ticker symbol payoff, just a chance to change the world in a way I hadn't considered in a long, long time. The debate. That night, I gathered the executive team in the conference room, Daniel, Priya, Jessica, Howard, and a few department heads. I laid out the letter, summarized the call, and waited. Jessica spoke first. Philosophically, it's beautiful. But practically, it's dangerous. We're just past IPO. Investors want upward trajectories, not humanitarian side projects. Daniel disagreed. It's not a side project, it's a statement. We'd be the first publicly traded medtech company to actively invest in humanitarian tech at scale. Investors don't care about statements, Jessica said. They care about returns. But what if they're the same thing Priya asked? What if reputation becomes our strongest form of capital? Howard leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, listening to the room bounce back and forth. Finally, he looked at me. You already know what you're going to do, don't you? I nodded slowly. Yes, but I needed to hear it said out loud. The conversation with the board. A week later, I presented the idea to the board along with a 14-page risk assessment, proposed budget, and potential long-term brand value. Half the room was supportive, the other half, not so much. One member, a former CFO of a pharmaceutical chain, said bluntly, "We're not in the business of charity, Elaine. We're here to increase shareholder value." I understand, I replied evenly. But shareholder value and human impact aren't mutually exclusive. In fact, they're increasingly intertwined. Another board member raised an eyebrow. And if the project fails, then we'll have data, I said. Insight, experience, and a reputation for trying something no one else dared. They voted 5-4 in favor of greenlighting a 12-month pilot initiative. It was barely a win, but it was a beginning. The first visit. 6 months later, I found myself standing in a makeshift surgical tent in northern Uganda. The heat was sweltering, the conditions were brutal, but inside the tent was a prototype the size of a dorm fridge designed by Walker MedTech engineers in collaboration with NGO doctors and surgeons from 3 continents. It wasn't pretty, it didn't hum with luxury, but it worked, and in its first week it assisted in 6 emergency abdominal surgeries. 5 of those patients would have died otherwise. I wasn't there for a photo op. There was no press. Just me. Watching. Listening. One of the field doctors pulled me aside before I left. "You know," he said, wiping sweat from his brow. "We've spent years trying to get big companies to take us seriously, to see what they build not just as revenue, but as lifelines." He paused, eyes scanning the rugged landscape outside. "You're the first one who didn't laugh us out of the room." I swallowed hard. I almost did, I admitted. I almost forgot why I started building in the first place. The return home. When I got back to Phoenix, I found a letter on my desk. This one wasn't from a stranger. It was from an investor. A skeptical one who had voted against the humanitarian initiative. It read, "Elaine, we don't always agree, but I've been watching the market's reaction to the fieldwork press coverage. You were right. Your brand just became synonymous with something money can't buy: trust. Congratulations. Gordon." A family dinner. That weekend I hosted dinner at my place. Daniel brought his partner. Jessica brought her rescue dog. Priya showed up with a bottle of wine and a grin that meant she had gossip. Howard arrived last, as always, with dessert. "You know," he said as we ate when we started Walker MedTech, "we just wanted to make something useful." I smiled, and we did. He raised his glass, but now it's something more. We clinked glasses. The room was full of laughter, warmth, and something deeper: legacy. Late-night reflections. Later that night, I sat alone on my balcony, the city lights blinking in rhythm with my thoughts. Walker MedTech was no longer just mine. It belonged to the future, and I was finally okay with that. In the quiet, I took out my notebook, the same one I had brought to Sedona months earlier, and wrote down one sentence: "Building a company is one kind of legacy. Using it for something greater is another." I closed the notebook and smiled. Not all victories come with applause. Some come with purpose. And purpose, I've learned, is the one thing that makes all the scars worth carrying. It was a warm September morning in Phoenix when I realized I was ready to let go. Not out of exhaustion, not from fear, but because for the first time in my life, I trusted that the world I had helped shape could stand without me holding every bolt in place. It began with an email from Daniel. Subject: 30th Anniversary Gala Final Draft Agenda Attachment +1 slot. "We have some news. The gala was our way of marking 3 decades since Walker MedTech's inception. The company I had started with a refurbished copier, a second-hand desk, and Howard Mitchell's stubborn faith was now global, public, and profitable. But more importantly, it was respected, and it had a future far beyond my fingertips. In the news, Daniel met me for coffee 2 days before the gala. We sat at the same cafe where I used to grade nursing exams and sketch prototype ideas on napkins while he napped in a stroller beside me. He looked nervous. "I wanted to tell you this in person," he said, taking a deep breath. "Sarah and we're expecting." I froze, the moment widening like sunlight through fog. "You're going to be a father," I whispered. He smiled almost sheepishly. "Yeah, we are." I reached across the table and grabbed his hand, and for a flicker of a second, I saw my entire life reframed not in stock options or acquisitions or press headlines, but in this one quiet, powerful truth. The future I had been building was no longer a strategy. It was becoming a person. Howard's announcement. The night of the gala was everything it needed to be: elegant, nostalgic, and just a little bit over the top. Howard wore a tuxedo that hadn't seen daylight since the IPO bell ringing. I wore navy blue, clean, simple, strong. During dessert, Howard took the stage. He started with a few jokes, some well-worn memories of our earliest days. I once hand-soldered a circuit board on Elaine's coffee table. It caught fire. She offered me another cup of coffee. Then his voice grew quiet. 30 years is a long time, he said, scanning the room. Some of you weren't even born when we started this company. Some of you were. Some of you, like me, feel every year of it in your bones. A ripple of warm laughter. I've spent my life helping build something I believed in. But now it's time to pass the torch. Not because I've lost faith, but because I have more of it than ever. Gasps, whispers. I turned to look at him, surprised, but not shocked, because I'd seen it coming. He glanced at me and smiled. Elaine's not the only one who gets to walk out with grace. The next generation. 2 weeks later, we held a private board meeting to discuss succession planning, not just for Howard, but for my own eventual exit from operational involvement. Daniel was already CEO, but we knew leadership couldn't rest on one person. We needed a structure, a system of mentorship, a seedbed for future innovation. That's when Daniel brought up Priya Malik. She's already running operations. She's already commanding respect across departments and the board. She's the bridge between generations. I nodded, and she sees farther than I ever did. By unanimous vote, we named Priya the company's first ever president of global strategy, a role designed to evolve into CEO over time after Daniel's planned sabbatical for paternity leave and research. As for me, I chose a new title, Founder Emeritus. It sounded ceremonial. And it was. But it also meant I no longer had keys to every room, and that was the point. You can't hold on and lift others at the same time. A conversation by the pool. That weekend, I invited Howard over for one last Friday evening chat in my backyard, the same place we'd once diagrammed product cycles on napkins and practiced funding pitches with scotch in hand. "You ever think we made too many sacrifices?" I asked, staring into the pool's still water. Howard didn't answer at first. Then he said, "No, I think we made just enough." I turned to him. "Do you regret not having kids?" He smiled faintly. "I helped raise a company. And a boy named Daniel who turned out pretty damn good. That's legacy enough." We clinked glasses, no speeches, no tears. Just two old dreamers watching their dream take root in people they'd once mentored. The final letter. On my last official day in the office, I came in early. The halls were quiet, the labs humming softly. I made a slow lap through each department, smiling at familiar faces, waving at new ones. Then I walked into my office, soon to be someone else's, and placed a sealed envelope in the top drawer. It was addressed to the person who sits here next. Inside was a handwritten note. Dear future leader, I once sat at this desk wondering if I was good enough, smart enough, tough enough to do what this company needed. I still ask those questions. The difference is I no longer fear the answers. You don't need to be perfect to lead. You just need to care more about people than perception. This company was built not just with technology, but with grit. With early mornings, late nights, and the fierce belief that medicine should serve everyone, not just those who can afford it. You're not just holding a title, you're holding people's trust. Guard it well. With hope and faith, Elaine Walker, founder, Walker MedTech. 3 months later, I stood in the back of a small hospital in rural New Mexico, watching one of our mobile surgery units help deliver a baby during a power outage. The doctor, a young woman from Honduras, looked up at me afterward and said, "Your company saved a life today." I smiled, hand over my chest. "No, you did." She shrugged. I had the tools. I turned to walk outside the desert sun rising behind me. A new day, a new future. Not mine to lead anymore, but mine to believe in. And I did, with every beat of my grateful, battle-worn heart.